Yo, what's the story? How are you? So I want to do a little bit of cover on patterns, rules for competition. Because we're running this get your pattern scored by an umpire moment, and we've had some patterns come into us already, and we're already seeing results coming back from our 3 international umpires, who I'll introduce to you across this week, and you'll see who they are and what they're all about. But I thought it'd be good to actually introduce the rules of patterns in case people aren't sure where they're falling down or what the actual rules are. Because a lot of the time we just get out on the mat, do a pattern, get a few flags, and that's either win or lose, right? But where, why, how, what magic is being used to decipher winners from non-winners? So let's break down how patterns works for a competition. So a little bit different. This is, again, I'm taking this off the ITF rules. These are the 2015 set of rules with the amendment in the 3rd of February 2017. So there you go. So we have how a patterns competition works. It's 1v1. One person steps onto the mat, another person steps onto the mat. Both competitors perform simultaneously. In international competition for black belts, it's 2 designated patterns. In international competition for colour belt, like the World Cup, it's 1 designated pattern. Usually, at least in Irish tournaments, it's optional pattern for colour belts, but it's designated pattern for black belts, and it's 2. So black belts, 2 patterns, both designated. Colour belts, 1 pattern. Internationally designated, nationally is optional in Ireland at least, right? So small change for the black belt as well is you will definitely be getting 1 of the 3 patterns from your grade and then 1 pattern from anywhere else. So that's how black belt patterns works. And how is it scored? Because this is where it often gets confusing. So we'll go through the process and the procedure, and then we'll go through the actual rules and where they fall down. So there are 3 levels of scoring for patterns: level 1, 2, 3. Level 1 is worth up to 6 points. And the way it works is you start at 10 points. You start at 10 points, and as the umpires see errors or mistakes, they make deductions. So in level 1, the deductions come in 0.2 increments. 0.2 increments. So that means you have a maximum of 30 errors before you get a 0 in level 1, right? And all of this is scored. So level 1 is scored as they're watching the pattern. So every time you make a mistake, they're clicking level, 0.2, 0.2, 0.2. And that's your level 1, up to a maximum of 6 points lost. But there's a little caveat there as well. Your score can go straight to 0 if you have a major mistake, which we'll cover those kind of killer mistakes in a minute. Level 2 and level 3 come at the end of the round. So when the pattern is finished from medium pro, it's level 2 is worth 2 points in 0.5 deductions. So 0.5, 0.5, 0.5, 0.5, up to 2 points can be removed from a competitor at level 2, and this is for errors in overall rhythm and sine wave. So if if there's lots of mistakes in your rhythm and lots of mistakes in your sine wave overall, it can be deducted a maximum of 2 points. Level 3, similarly, a further 2 point deduction in 0.5 increments, and this is for errors in overall power. So if you're strolling through your pattern with no power, there's up to 2 points lost there, again in 0.5 increments. So how this works then is after all the deductions are summed together, you get a total score taken away from your starting score is 10 minus what the umpires have taken off you. That's your final score. So if the umpires take 6 marks off you across the board, across the 3 levels, your final score for that pattern is 4. So that's how that's your score. So if 2 people play each other, one person finishes with a 4, one person finishes with a 6. The 6 is the winner, right? And that's how we score patterns in ITF. So let's talk the actual what are the 0.2 deductions, what are the 0.5 deductions, and what are the level 2 and level 3 deductions, right? So let's do the serious penalties first. These are the things that will send you straight to 0 for an entire pattern, regardless of power or sine wave or whatever else. So if you make one of these mistakes, these are killer blows. You get straight to 0, and there's only kind of 5 of them, right? Oops, kick the camera there, good stuff. So what are they? So stopping the pattern completely or not finishing the pattern at all. So you get halfway through, you forget where you're going, you stop, sorry, it's a 0. If you pause or stop during the pattern for more than 2 seconds, so you're wandering through, let's take something like, Dango, and you're halfway through and you forget where to turn, and you sit there for 2 or 3 or 4 seconds, then oh yeah, it comes back to me, and you continue on, and you finish the pattern completely, doesn't matter. It's still a 0 because your pause or your stop is longer than 2 seconds. If you start the pattern facing the wrong way, straight to 0. And, that's fair enough. If you start the pattern that's different to the one that's been designated, and this is really only kind of at black belts or I suppose colour belts internationally, right? And this is a kind of a double-edged rule. So if the pattern called is Dan Gun and you do Do San, you get a 0, right? Because you didn't do the pattern that was called. Or, and here's the caveat to this one, with any fundamental technique other than the one defined for that pattern. So if you start the pattern with the wrong fundamental technique, you go straight to 0, even if you finish the pattern completely. The first movement has to be right, is what I'm reading from that. Umpires chime in. Another place where you go straight to 0 is failing to perform the total number of movements required by the technical directions of the pattern. So if you forget a movement or you add a movement in, straight to 0, right? And now this can be debated, and you'll see why in a minute. But we'll see, right? So these deductions, these zeros these are the killer blows. So if you make one of these mistakes, you go straight to 0 for that pattern, and the only way you're getting another shot at the title or another shot at that round is if the other person gets a 0 in a 1 round pattern competition, for example. In which case it'd be a draw and you go again, right? We've covered the level 2 and level 3. They come down in 0.5, and it's just at the end of the pattern the judges will score it as they see fit. How do we deduct 0.2? And I want to just make sure I get this right. So the 0.2, so these are every occurrence of this is worth a 0.2 deduction. So it's not like, I only made one, I made this mistake and that's my 0.2 deduction. If you continue to make the same mistake, it's 0.2 off every time. So think of patterns like Tege with the sitting stances, or Po-1 with the sitting stances. If your sitting stance is wrong, every time you walk through that sequence, the W's in Tege or the 7 continuous movements, it's click, 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 click. You're just throwing marks away because your stance is incorrect, right? So let's walk through what the 0.2 deductions are. So up to a maximum of 6 points. Some of them are kind of simple enough. So if you forget to call the name of the pattern at the end of the round, 0.2. If you shout kiap or any kind of shouting at any point in the pattern, or you finish the pattern at the end shouting anything except the name of the pattern, 0.2 deduction. You perform a technique from the pattern at an incorrect height. Do San, first movement, high outer forearm side block, and you do middle, 0.2. If you lose your balance, something like Wanyo, bending ready stance, you kick, you recover, you have a wobble, 0.2. If you hesitate or stop for more than a split second, and that's very kind of subjective in the eye of the beholder. So, and again, comes down to rhythm, but it's written here as a 0.2 deduction. Not returning to the starting spot within the distance of 1 shoulder radius. So, if your pattern is correct enough, but something like Jungun tends to finish like really long for some people, or Do San finishes short sometimes for people. So you need to be within 1 shoulder radius of where you started your pattern, or else there's a 0.2 deduction on that for you as well. Interesting one here is lack of power on a specific technique. So in addition to losing your up to 2 marks for your overall lack of power, you can lose 0.2 throughout the pattern for not having power. So power is becoming important now as a thing that you're losing marks on. So if you step back to the starting spot with the wrong foot, so instead of left to right, you do right to left, and that's 0.2 deduction. If you step out of the ring completely, 0.2 deduction. If the stepping that's designated in the pattern, again, take Do San, center line turn, you do this incorrectly, or Kwanghae with the double step, you do this incorrectly. Where you place your foot after kicking, for example, in something like Quebec, after the Dalio Chagi before the jump side kick, shifting instead of sliding instead of shifting, all of these kind of inaccurate or incorrect steppings, 0.2. Breathing is incorrect. Take Dangun, continuous motion, you leave it out, 0.2. Inaccurate preparation or execution of the technique. So ready positions and blocks, incorrect. instead of crossing back to back, you do something like this or you'd cross the other way for a low block or whatever, and it's incorrect. Or it's in the brackets here. It's written pre-action. I don't really know what they mean by pre-action. If you have any idea what pre-action is, let me know. Maybe it's from here, and you do some sort of shake or wobble or movement that isn't part of the actual performance of the pattern, isn't designated, isn't written anywhere. So yeah, I guess that's pre-action. Another one that's interesting because it's worth up to 2 marks after the fact as well is inaccurate or incorrect sine wave. So if your sine wave is off, in addition to losing up to 2 marks overall, you can lose 0.2 for every instance of sine wave being incorrect. So classic example is after kicking, no sine wave. Where it's meant to be. Do-san, front snap kick, wan-yo, side piercing kick, you-go, side piercing, no sine wave, sorry. We see people fall into that a lot. 0.2 there. And here's one this is a killer for people. Inaccurate or incorrect stance. 0.2. Again, I said to you already about patterns like Po-on or Tae-ge with the sitting stances. Do-san with the sitting stance. Sitting stance is an awful one for killing people. I see it as an umpire myself. 0.2, 0.2, 0.2, 0.2, 0.2. But inaccurate or incorrect stance. If your stance is not right, you're losing 0.2. So if your walking stance, for example, is too narrow and the whole pattern is built on walking stance or L stance or something like this, is too wide, and these are the 2 only stances and they're incorrect, you're losing 0.2 for every single movement. Inaccurate or incorrect motion, so it's called for continuous motion and you do connecting motion, or it's called for fast motion and you do it slow or normal, right? So this is it. So something like Jung-gun with the palm pressing block, you do these fast. 0.2. Attacking or defending with the wrong technique, you do the wrong technique. 0.2. So if it's meant to be a middle block and you do a reverse knife hand, it's 0.2. And this is one that we've seen an awful lot of coming into play in the rules recently. Is incorrect suspension, holding, or termination, retraction of a kick according to the technical definition for that kick. So we have some fantastic kickers in ITF Taekwondo that really love to show that off. So we used to see side piercing kicks that would be held out there for 10 million years and then they'd come back and it's not really a side piercing kick. So it needs to lift up, hit, return, and come back. And fast enough, but fast enough to be a real kick without, sitting there and posing for 10 or 15 foot photographs, right? 0.2 deduction there, right? Also, it means after stuff like after your kick, instead of coming back and retracting to the chamber position, for example, you just fall into your next stance. 0.2 here as well. So these are the 0.2 deductions, and what's worth thinking about is these 0.2s are cumulative, right? So they give an example in the rules, and I have them in front of me, so I'm not making any mistakes. But stuff like, here's the example, right? In the event that a single technique has multiple errors, deduct 1 penalty for every error performed. So if the pattern requires a walking stance high forefist punch, however the competitor performs an L stance middle fingertip thrust, deduct 0.2 for incorrect technique, 0.2 for incorrect height, 0.2 for incorrect stance, meaning a total of 0.6 gone. So it's not just like they pick one. If they see 3 or 4 errors in one technique, you'll get clicked 3 or 4 times. And that's how deductions are gone. So what I find slightly interesting about this example is, remember we talked about the 0 point deductions, the killer blows. So the last one of them is failing to perform the total number of movements required by the technical direction of the pattern, forgetting or adding one or more movement. So if you perform that example where you were supposed to be walking stance middle punch and you did an L stance fingertip thrust, have you not forgotten that movement? Have you not left that out now? Should that not be a 0 because you didn't perform that? Or should it be just the 0.2 deductions because the total number of movements is the same, even though one of them is completely wrong and you forgot it? I don't know. Umpires, chime in on that one. I would love to know what the law is and the ruling on that one. But yeah, I mean, from reading the example, it seems like as long as the total number of movements is correct, even if one of them is completely wrong, you should just be technically deducted rather than penalised to 0. But that doesn't seem to make sense. If you leave out a key part of the pattern, you should get a 0 in my opinion. If you leave out a movement and replace it with a different one, surely that's a 0. Who knows? That's why I'm not an international umpire and others are. So These are some of the these are the key kind of points. But again, what you see here is an emphasis being placed on things like sine wave, things like power, right? So you can lose marks across the board for sine wave, for power. So these are becoming really important components of your pattern performance, right? It makes you think how you perform your pattern, right? Do I sacrifice balance, maybe because it's only 0.2, looking for power, or do I sacrifice power to keep my balance? And hard to know, hard to say, right? There's other people that will say, well, if you don't have balance, you don't have power, so that's on you anyway, right? So anyway, these are the rules. These are how we score patterns. Hopefully, it gives you some insight into how ITF patterns are scored, and it will give you some value and something to think about when you see the results starting to come through for our people who have been submitting patterns to us, for our umpires. As I said, I'll do a little post on the 3 umpires that are scoring patterns for us this week or next week sometime, and we'll get the first few patterns out again with their scores this week or next week when I get them coming back in. So please, if you want your pattern scored by an ITF international umpire that's been at Worlds and European Championships, please send them to us, get them into us, and we will send your video on to them. They will score it exactly like this, the 3 levels. And on top of that, instead of you just getting a score, you'll get the breakdown at each level, and you'll get feedback from the umpire as to why you're picking up losses. So rather than just, I lost 6 points and I don't know where, now you're going, well, you lost 6 points because all your L stances were wrong, and your power was okay, and you only lost 1 mark. So it'll be a little bit more detailed than you'd get in a competition, right? So even if you are a competitor who's doing patterns and has been doing patterns for a while, and you're still not sure where your scores are falling down, maybe this will give you a tool here, or this can bring value to you to give you some way of figuring out where you're falling down from at least these 3 umpires, right? Every umpire is different, and patterns is notoriously varied in the way it's scored, and we might even see a bit of that, but who knows? Anyway, look, it's a tool there. I think it's a really good opportunity to get feedback on your patterns. If you want feedback on your patterns from a competitive point of view, please send them on to us. And if you're liking all of this stuff, let us know. Let us know what you think. Let us know what else you'd like to see. We'll do the scoring for sparring next time, so you have an idea around that as well. How to read the scoreboard in sparring. Often I've had my own students look at the scoreboard and not realise what they actually mean, thinking they're winning and they've actually just got 13 warnings or something like that. So we'll dig into that next time as well. So if you're enjoying the content, let us know. Like it, give it a share, subscribe to it. You can check us out on podcasts, on YouTube, on Facebook, on Instagram, we're everywhere. So yeah, cool. Thanks for your time. I'll see you next time. Cheers.